In 2020, Mary Frances Winters published the book Black Fatigue: How Racism Erodes the Mind, Body, and Spirit. The book, among other things, highlighted the genuinely draining nature that many black Americans deal with through experiencing racism in a white supremacist society like the United States. Winters argues that dealing with racism induces something similar to a health pre-existing condition effect on black people, which in turn not just influences how they engage in racial relations with non-black Americans, but also how they navigate their everyday lives in general. In Winters' own words, the repeated variations of stress that result in extreme exhaustion and cause mental, physical, and spiritual maladies that are passed down from generation to generation. She continues by saying, these experiences can lead to internalized oppression, which is when we believe the negative stereotypes about our group that have been perpetrated by the dominant group. I think internalized oppression is more common than we know because there is little research on its widespread impact on feelings of self-doubt, its erosion of self-esteem and self-worth, and its generation of helplessness and hopelessness. Internalized oppression generated by systemic racism can lead to a feeling of needing constantly to be on guard and increase stress levels. The book was a commercial and critical success, and the term black fatigue became a common phrase used in sociological academic circles discussing the effects of racism on the black psyche. Everyone clapped, agreed to abolish racism once and for all, and the world achieved peace for the first time in human history. I'm just kidding, of course. People just got more races.
Black fatigue is when I can hear you 10 miles away in Walmart with your 5 kids. Black fatigue is when you have no home training and you have no idea how to act in public. And a lot of it is culture. I've been in the hood, I've been in the schools and the projects where I was the only white girl there, and I can 100% guarantee you that it's culture.
It's hard to pinpoint exactly when it happened, but the term black fatigue was hijacked sometime in early 2025 by white racists on social media, particularly on TikTok. There was an increasingly popular genre of TikTok video that was essentially just white people ranting about how difficult it was to interact with, or really just be in the presence of black people for a variety of stereotypical reasons. Black people were too loud, rowdy, violent, disrespectful, or dangerous, and white people were just so tired of dealing with them. A lot of these videos usually included high-profile cases of black people committing or being accused of crimes, or footage of black people causing a disturbance of some type in a public manner. Now, these type of videos were not particularly new, and the overall sentiment the videos instill goes back literally hundreds of years in white culture. But what was new was the classification of these feelings as black fatigue. It was a total co-option of the term to now describe the white racial resentment towards black people rather than black people's distress towards racism, a true bastardization. And unfortunately, because there are more racist white people in America than there are black people in general, the new definition of black fatigue went extremely mainstream and became the default definition outside of academic circles. If there was a video with black people doing anything negative, you can guarantee that almost every comment under it will be saying things like, I'm fatigued, as a kinda if you know dog whistle. Now, please know that I'm using the word negative extremely loosely here, because this also includes videos like black people celebrating graduation or going to prom. Those type of videos also made white races very, very angry, but that's a topic for another video. Now, it's important to recognize that this is not the first time this phrase bastardization has happened. I'd argue the two biggest examples of terminology being stolen from the black lexicon are the terms woke and DEI, both being turned into insults and pejoratives by the white American right wing, which literally now includes the federal government, unfortunately.
We've ended the tyranny of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion policies all across the entire federal government and indeed the private sector and our military. And our country will be woke no longer.
I would argue that this time around felt even more malicious in my opinion, because these videos and comments have genuine hatred seeping from them, and that's pretty hard to ignore. But I would say that the most obvious rebuttal to this term is to point out that black people have had white fatigue for literally centuries. I find it amusing to think that a white person feels justified in hating black people because they saw a black person arguing with a fast food worker, but black people aren't justified in hating white people for over 400 years of chattel slavery and over 100 years of legal bigotry and discrimination, not to mention the terrorism and mass murder. Hell, I'm pretty sure every race has white fatigue to a degree. Obviously, empathy isn't a strong suit when it comes to races, but it's painfully ironic to talk about the sins of another racial group when you cannot throw a dart at a map of the world and not find a place where white people haven't killed, colonized, plundered, or raped. But I digress. I think the thing that makes someone truly racist is not seeing a person as an individual, but instead as a representative of their race. If a white person kills someone, that person is an evil scumbag. If a black person kills someone, then it's because black people are inherently violent and or have a violent culture that doesn't have proper morals. This at its core is dehumanization and also just illogical on its premise. If we were to talk numbers for a second, black people make up about 13 to 14% of the population and around 32 to 38% of the prison population, which equals out to about 760,000 people. Which means out of the 47 million black people in the US, only around 1.6% of black people are convicted criminals in jail. Mind you, this is not taking into account over policing of black neighborhoods, mandatory minimums, plea deals, and just straight up wrongful convictions, all driving that number up. And yet, despite this, what's the number one stereotype about black people? That they're criminals. This is because racism at its core is not due to observable factors, but instead preconceived notions and ideas. The idea of black people being violent or inferior is created in the mind of a racist first, and then reality is twisted to conform to that worldview. In reality, the overwhelming majority of racist white people don't have actual personal negative experiences of their own to justify their racism, so they have to harp on individual instances that happen to other people. A black person doing something wrong to a white person is never about the individuals involved in the incident. It's always a reflection of the overall status of black and white relations, no matter if the statistics don't say the same thing. It's all about feeling justified. To a racist, nothing matters more than their feelings. And this leads me to the main point of the video and the reason why you clicked on it.
Dude, look at this nigga chimping out. Look at this nigga chimping out. That's the news team. Y'all know his name now. Isaiah Ware. Pussy ass fuck niggas.
Dalton Levi Etherly, known online as Chud the Builder, has managed to become one of the most talked about online personalities in a very short amount of time. Dalton, who lives in Tennessee, is a self-described free speech advocate who has spent the last month streaming himself walking around and calling black people the N-word. The formula works mostly like this. He approaches a group of black people and asks if they support free speech. And when they say yeah, he says, "Oh, that means that white people can say nigger." And as you can expect, when the black people react negatively, Dalton starts hurling slurs at them and saying that he can say what he wants because there's free speech in America. Dalton also carries a canister of pepper spray and a handgun and threatens to use both when these confrontations turn physical. It should be noted that the day I finally started to write this script, Dalton had officially shot someone during a confrontation and is currently in police custody, being charged with, amongst other things, attempted murder. He could potentially face decades in prison if convicted on all the charges. My original goal in talking about Dalton was to say that he was likely to kill someone very soon, but even I didn't think it was going to happen that fast. Dalton had made it clear that his end goal was to eventually kill a black person, writing on Twitter a few days before the shooting, quote, "Series finale is a dead chimp on the pavement and you monkeys rioting when I walk free. Stay tuned," end quote.
We're in America, bro. They want to threaten your life, you take theirs. You put them on the ground, and you go live on Kick. You say, look at this dumb nigger laying dead on the ground.
Holy shit, bro.
If you haven't noticed, Dalton is obsessed with calling black people chimps, especially using the term chimping out to refer to black people angrily reacting to him calling them slurs. The term originated on 4chan years ago during early Black Lives Matter protests, and personally, I always felt like white people calling black people chimps was major projection, because in my opinion, white people share way more physical characteristics with chimps than black people, but it is what it is. Now, as you can imagine, Dalton has a ton of online support, receiving streaming donations, which allows him to monetize his harassment campaigns. Dalton was originally streaming on the popular platform Kick, which has garnered a reputation for allowing the more undesirable side of streamers compared to his competitor Twitch. However, after seeing just how unhinged Chud was, and in great part to the American Freedman Legal Fund, Dalton was eventually indefinitely suspended. There has been a lot of right-wing influencers that emerged in the past few years, but I haven't seen any blow up as fast as Chud the Builder has. I first saw him on Twitter a few weeks ago, and my For You page has had him prominently featured ever since. It's really suspicious how the algorithm pushed this guy so hard, and I wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't genuine. Getting into the nitty-gritty of everything, I wanted to say that I think Chud the Builder is probably the purest embodiment of the post-Trump white nationalism and racism that has emerged since Trump first announced he was running for president. Dalton says the reason why he's doing this is to be a free speech absolutist, but that premise makes literally no sense with even the littlest thought. First of all, the First Amendment is to protect you from the state, not protection from other citizens on the street. Somebody getting mad at what you say has literally nothing to do with the First Amendment. Having the freedom of speech is also not having the freedom from consequence, which is what Dalton is truly fighting for. Dalton believes that he is being oppressed by society because he can't say slurs openly without people getting mad. Like, that's it. That's what this is all about. I can't imagine that in a world where some journalists literally die at the hands of governments, that this fucking loser thinks he's a martyr or something. It really goes to show you how privileged these people are, that saying slurs is the issue he wants to put his entire life behind. It's really absurd and pathetic. There are already a ton of restrictions on free speech that Dalton and his followers are choosing to ignore. No one is saying that they're oppressed because you can't yell fire in a crowded room when there isn't actually any fire, because everyone understands that the purpose of those restrictions is human safety. There are literally no hate speech laws in America, so I don't know what the logic is of saying slurs in public when there's practically already no consequence. Funny enough though, there is an argument that what Chud does is not at all free speech, because there is a fighting words restriction under the First Amendment that plays out in the judicial system. This just means that if I say something to someone else that's reasonable enough to incite violence, there's a chance the victim of my speech will likely face a reduced punishment, if any, if the confrontation leads to violence. Dalton and his supporters seem really gung-ho on the alleged double standard of black people being able to say nigga and white people being condemned for it. There's not a whole lot to argue against that, but to say that any white person who unironically doesn't get why this double standard exists really isn't worth engaging with. The N-word went from a historical insult that encapsulated the idea that black people were on the same level as animals to an endearing term and often just a pronoun used by black Americans to take back the power it once had. It would make sense that white people saying nigga and obviously saying the hard R just hits a little too close to home. This is a point most white people already understand, which is why they don't say the N-word at all, or when they do say it, they mean it to be purposely disrespectful towards black people. And even with that being said, a lot of black people are okay with whites using both nigga and the hard R, which also includes black people that Dalton has had encounters with.
Even freedom of speech. White men can say nigger, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, they can say what the fuck you Mexican.
Yeah, and they're not going to chimp out. Don't tell me I'm out here antagonizing people when I'm shaking hands, and this is why we're making a difference. Yeah, real nigger shit.
This fact defeats Dalton's whole point about black people being extremely sensitive about the N-word, that they're willing to fight and kill any white person who says it. That was the reason that he had given when someone asked why he targets the black community, and not like, oh, I don't know, maybe the most protected minority community that exists in America. And no, that's not me saying I want these white supremacists to harass Jewish people in their own communities, because I don't. But let's be honest, if this guy was walking around Crown Heights calling Jewish people the K word, he probably wouldn't get past day 3 before he'd be arrested for a hate crime. The reason why he targets black people is because he knows the Southern Republican state of Tennessee isn't going to leap to defend that community explicitly. Another thing that boggles my whole mind about this thing is when Dalton and his followers seem to think that black people reacting negatively to being called racial slurs is some sort of gotcha, as if they're discovering a new element or something by showing that being rude and disrespectful usually leads to people wanting to fight you. Like, people on Twitter are literally going, ha, see, black people are so violent. They want to harm you for being disrespectful and rude to them. Like, yeah, no shit. If you call anyone a slur, they'll probably react the same way. You can even remove the racial elements. Like, if you call the group of white guys gay or pussies, they'd probably also try to fight you. These type of people seem to think rage baiting people is okay, but being rage baited is a sign of savagery. And to be honest, that's some real elementary school bully logic if you ask me. Dalton has had many run-ins with the law during his racial rampages, but was never arrested despite clearly committing harassment as is described under Tennessee law, which is intentionally communicating a threat to another person where the person intends the communication to be a threat of harm to the victim, and a reasonable person would perceive it as such. It also applies to communicating with another person without a lawful purpose, anonymously or otherwise, with the intent that the frequency or means of the communication annoys, offends, alarms, or frightens the recipient. And it actually does so. I don't know about other people, but a white guy with a gun getting in my face and calling me the N-word would certainly make me think that my life was in danger. Not only that, but there's also a Tennessee civil rights statute declaring that it is the right of every person, regardless of race, color, ancestry, religion, or national origin, to be secure and protected from fear, intimidation, harassment, and bodily injury. The law further states that advocacy of unlawful acts by groups or individuals against other persons for the purpose of inciting and provoking bodily injury or death is not constitutionally protected, poses a threat to public order and safety, and should be subject to criminal sanctions. I think the most fucked up part of this whole thing is that the police waited until Dalton tried to kill someone before finally charging him with harassment. It was a complete oversight from law enforcement, especially because the FBI was already aware of Dalton and had questioned him just a few days before the shooting.
These people took all my phones. That is evidence of the crime of me streaming, me walking out, disorderly conduct. I don't believe that for a second. They were like conceding in a way, like, see, like as humans want to just give you this piece of advice. They're like, you know where this shit's going. This shit only escalates. And I do know this. I just have profound faith in the Lord that things might not go the worst way possible. Which is anybody getting hurt. Because I don't want to see anybody getting hurt. You get killed, or you have to defend yourself and you end up killing someone, there will be massive riots. And these guys are basically in charge of preventing these massive riots.
The state has a moral obligation to protect its citizens from these types of people, especially the minorities. Tennessee, which is the same state where the KKK was founded, really should be one of the states that are on top of these sort of things. But to be honest, I really think that the lack of a rush to enforce laws on Dalton is because of the community being targeted and probably some real sympathies for his cause. I mean, Dalton was just granted a bond for his attempted murder charge, despite having already been out on bond for a dine and dash he committed just a few days before the shooting. Dalton represents a clear threat to the public, and there's zero excuse for the judge giving him a bond. With the amount of money his supporters are giving him, it's extremely likely that by the time you watch this video, he will already be out on bond. And that's really crazy to think, because it's clear Dalton is willing to sacrifice everything for this. And I genuinely don't think his story ends outside of him dying or going to prison. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the accusations against Dalton, about him allegedly being gay, creepy towards women, and having some sort of relationship with a black trans woman in the past, it'll be impossible to prove that shit even happened anyway. And obviously, something in his life led him down the path of evil. Now, mind you, Dalton has a young son who, instead of taking care of and teaching him how to be like a great white man or whatever the fuck, instead puts his safety and freedom on the line for random racist people on the internet. That fact makes one thing clear. Chud is a domestic terrorist who's willing to kill and be killed. I feel as though if it wasn't for him having his obvious social skills, he would have just been another one of the many white supremacist mass shooters like Dylan Roof and the Buffalo Shooter. He needs to be taken off the streets, and I hope justice will prevail before another black person is hurt by him. Lastly, I'm going to say that white supremacists believe that basic human decency is a sign of weakness and will do anything to devolve society into a bunch of people being unbelievably cruel to one another. I know it's extremely hard not to, but we cannot let ourselves be fueled by hatred the way that they are, no matter how justified our anger is. Especially for black Americans who see yet another white supremacist influencer being praised by hundreds of thousands of people. There's already been some Chud copycats doing his similar shtick, so I guess that's just something that's going to happen now. And I don't know about you, but you can bet your ass that I am thoroughly fatigued. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe. I will post a link to the victim's GoFundMe account if you'd like to donate, as well as my Cashapp if you'd like to support me making videos. I will definitely make an update video if there are major developments in the story, which I'm sure there will be. Until then, take care and stay safe, because it's getting crazy out there.